Thank you very much, Chair. And I think, I suppose this is quite significant. Many of us would have spoken in the Chamber in regard to the importance of this piece of legislation and how it effectively gives back to the local authorities the first port of call for planning applications. And I think the importance for that is that the SHD process deprived local communities of the opportunity to contribute to the planning process and gave them very limited scope to have a course of repeal and the judicial review being the only option in many cases. So I want to, first of all, to thank the Minister for bringing forward this legislation to bring an end to the SHD process. It's really crucial because I think the previous government relied far too much on the market, both in terms of the type of products that homes were being delivered, but also the belief that a fast-track process in itself would deliver homes, and that has proved to be not the case. So it's an important piece of legislation. It ends the SHD process, and it'll ensure that local communities have a voice. The Minister attended with me a community consultation which we had with residents in Santry, and Santry has been one of those communities that has seen significant development but had very little opportunity to contribute at the planning stage, and what was being provided was largely buy-to-let property. So they wanted more housing for the children that they had in their homes, more housing for the people who lived in their community, but what was delivered would not satisfy that. And I want to thank the Minister for coming out to Santry to discuss these motions with that community and talking to them through the process of what this legislation will do. The wording of my amendment differs slightly from Amendment 43. Amendment 43 seeks to include community organisations or community representatives in the planning process. And I think the difficulty with that is, and I think the other parties might have had that same problem, it's very difficult to define that. And so my amendment seeks to use the structure known as the Public Participation Network as one body that might be consulted. And I think there's different ways of doing that, of consulting and involving. And if the Minister has difficulty with some elements of my amendment, I'd ask him to consider it and perhaps see if his officials can improve on it. But I really feel that using both the PPN Secretariat and the PPN itself, it would be one method of including the community at an early stage in the planning process, without in any way delaying the overall timelines, because we all know that those timelines are so important, and that's certainly not my intention in any way to delay the process. It's about including communities, ironing out those problems early on, ensuring that communities have a voice, and that the process that the Minister has given them, that they're contributing at a really early stage. So I want to thank the Minister, and I'd ask him to consider the amendments.
Thank you, Deputy McAuliffe. Minister, to respond, please.
Yeah, thank deputies. I'll respond to all three in the grouping, if that's okay. Firstly, we didn't get a chance to respond at second stage in the DAW because the time elapsed. But I just want to put what we're doing here in context. What we're doing, and I welcome the broad agreement for the legislation, is reinstating two-stage planning process and putting planning back and decisions back at local authorities where they should be at. And that's something I firmly believe in. And that's one of the reasons why many contributors at second stage, and it is relevant to this because this is talking about public participation, is many residents felt that they could not participate because applications were made directly to the board under SHD. And if one was not happy with that decision, whilst they had some input through their councillors in a process that I wouldn't have been particularly happy with either, to be very frank, it was recourse to the courts through JR. We're reversing that now, and rightly so for these developments, which means that at a pre-application stage, and I've made amendments in the Shannon for this, is that the records of a pre-application meeting with a developer must be kept and must be published, and indeed the opinion and what's been asked for at pre-application stage must also be kept and must be published and published with the file. So residents and interest groups, and rightly so, will get to make observations on any planning application at the very beginning once the application is lodged, because pre-application doesn't bring about necessarily an application at all, right? And what we're also doing this is to restore democracy to planning at a local level is effectively to try to make our planning system efficient as well. And this is one of a number of measures that we as government will be bringing forward. So this will not just sit on its own. So effectively, we're restoring already that input that we want people to have. And I've accepted 2 amendments in the Shannon, as I said, in relation to a transparency around the pre-application process. So people will actually know what has been discussed at pre-application, what has been agreed and what has been asked for, and what opinion, furthermore, the local authority is giving on the pre-application. That's really, really important and fundamental, and that's tied in. So what we're also doing then to ensure that is that people will be able to make their observations once an application goes in, as is normal, as should be normal, should I say, should be normal in large developments, to their own local authority. Furthermore, when any LSRD application is actually lodged, every elected member of that local authority will be advised, as a matter of course, not on an ad hoc basis, that an application and its reference number has actually been lodged and that it's in, so that our local elected members are aware of what is in. So what we're saying here specifically, I looked closely at the amendments that have been tabled in the 143 and 44. I just want to give the overall context. It would appear that the proposed amendment might actually have its origins in the initial process outlined in the general scheme. It may also be that deputies wish to amend the provisions in section 32C and 32D as inserted by section 3 of the bill. However, as drafted, the amendment would technically provide for a further new consultation process, which would have, could have potentially quite significant impacts on timelines. I don't think any of us want that, but Deputy McAuliffe has referenced the meetings I've had with many different community groups, those in Santry, Deputy, that I met with you about the general issue. What residents wanted was a say in planning, and rightly so, and an end to SHDs. What we're doing with this legislation now is actually restoring the primacy of development plans and local area plans and master plans. And that must be that our planning is plan-led and development plan-led. There are other contributions were made at second stage around ministerial guidelines. That's something that I do intend to look at into the future. Just use this opportunity clearly to put that on the record. But in the context of this legislation and the fact that we need to move this forward and have the new legislation and regulations in by the 17th of December, I'm not in a position to accept the amendments. But what I will do, particularly in the suggestion of how we might structure something around a PPN, that type of thing to make it streamlined, I will have a look at that in more detail before report stage. But I cannot accept the amendments as they are now. But I do thank the deputies for the time and effort they have put in to tabling it then.